we have been hearing so much about Manjaro, which also helps us in weight loss. Are there any Ayurvedic replacements for that?
A lot of people massage their bellies with castor oil. From the herb perspective, yes, does very well. At metabolic level, even Shilajit really works well. But
from the lens of Ayurveda, is there any best time window to conceive?
Before you enter, basically, that is the best time from a season perspective. You should attempt to conceive during. That is the time when your fertility is at the highest.
Liver is also said to be like a storehouse of all our unresolved emotions. How is it manifesting for the liver, even if my diet is clean?
A lot of people who have anger, resentment, have like these unresolved emotions. They have like a lot of fat, medical terms called visceral fat around their belly.
How do I rekindle my Agni for better metabolism without having to rely on any diet or gymming? Is there any Ayurvedic process?
You're eating pesticides all the time. You're eating heavy metals all the time. A lot of diseases that might happen to you will not happen if you...
Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of Uncharted Conversations. I'm your host Natasha Singh, and I'm very in particular excited about this episode today because I think first time ever on Uncharted, we are actually doing a wellness episode. And me already being a big fan of Ayurveda, this episode is actually very close to me because also the guest that we have, I have seen her journey right from Shark Tank. And from there to today, she being on a podcast, talking about Ayurveda, talking about all the possible things that we can delve deeper into, right from PCOS to gut health, weight loss, weight gain, all of it. So I'm going to uncover all of it with her today. She is Ridhima, founder of Namya Foods. Can't wait to get this conversation started. Hi, Ridhima. Welcome to Uncharted.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you for calling me.
I would love to start with liver, actually. Liver in Ayurveda. We have heard that in Ayurveda, liver is called to be the seat of Pitta, which is the fire element, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, that liver is also said to be like a storehouse of all our unresolved emotions, whether that is rage, that's anger, suppressed grief, heartbreak, right? So how is this fire reacting with all these unresolved and suppressed emotions, and how is it manifesting for the liver, even if my diet is clean?
So I think first of all, liver is a very important organ, right? It's the second largest organ in the body after skin. When I first read it, I was shocked that it's larger than the brain, because I thought brain will be very big, right? So and it's the only organ which is regenerative in nature, right? So even if it gets damaged, you remove a little bit of the part and it will reform itself, right? Coming back to what Ayurveda says, right? So, we talk about the concept of Vat, Pitta, Kapha, right? And Pitta is supposed to be heat. Pitta is the reason why you have anger. Pitta is the reason why your digestion is sometimes stronger. Right? It also attributes to Jatharagni, which is the digestive fire, right? Which metabolizes everything in the body, right? And liver, perhaps, of course, in the Chinese medicine also, there's just so much conversation on the anger getting stored in the liver, right? And technically, if I had to talk about it, it basically is about a lot of cortisol that gets elevated. And the moment cortisol gets elevated, right, the absorption of cortisol or the metabolization of the cortisol has to happen at the liver, right? Now, the moment that happens, right, the liver goes into sympathetic nervous system, gets activated suddenly, right, because it's cortisol which is high, right? And the moment that happens, right, body gets a signal that I have to be in fight-flight mode, right? So it starts storing all the energy, right, as fat and does not let it go because it feels that it's in stress, right? And it's the ancient stress where the signal says that I'm not going to get food for the next, I don't know how many days, right? So in fact, you will notice a lot of people who have anger, resentment, have like these unresolved emotions. they have like a lot of fat, which we in medical terms call visceral fat around their belly, right? I know a lot of lean people who have this pouches of fat, which we say love handles as well, right, around their belly. In fact, you will also notice it in women with PCOS because they also have high cortisol levels for whatever reasons, right? But you will also see like a lot of fat around the ovaries, right? And you can look at the person and say that they have PCOS or not, or, they are under stress or not, just purely by these things. But coming back to the question that you asked, right? So yes, now it's, even science has proven that at the cellular level, the moment you have angst, anxiety, or unresolved emotion, right? At the genetic level, right? It just changes the structure of the gene at the cellular level, right? And that's the havoc that's being created primarily because of, this anger, this angst, which at the cellular level is not letting the cell, go through the process of detoxification or the regular functions that a cell has to go through. It's also called epigenetics, right? Where the structure of the cell suddenly changes because of a constant cortisol or a constant pressure on the cell just because you're feeling a certain way. Right. So yes, I mean, it's Ayurveda, it's Chinese medicine. Everybody's talking about it.
Right. So basically, we are talking about that how all this angst, hoards up the cortisol, which also manifests itself in terms of fatty liver or maybe a lot of visceral fat.
Right.
In fact, I was about to ask you that, is this the reason that why so many angry people, we see them on obese terms also. And the connection between angst and bile production and metabolic dysfunction. But I think you've pretty much given the answer.
It's the simple reason that, because of the upheaval from cortisol, your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, flight-fight mode gets activated. And then the regular functions of a liver, which is, metabolizing all the hormones, fat soluble, fats get absorbed in the liver, right? So the regular functions of detoxification and digestion completely gets stopped because of this. And of course, if that's happening, the detoxification process and all of those things will get hampered. And of course, because you're not letting that glucose do anything else, it's going to get settled on the liver and create fat.
Right. So is it dangerous then, because we also hear that, how alcohol damages our liver. So does stress damage it in the same way the way
absolutely.
Alcohol does?
In fact, so I'll tell you what happens when you drink alcohol. So when the alcohol reaches the liver, right, it basically releases a toxic substance called acetaldehyde, right? Now, and then, it further gets metabolized into acid, a further form of acetaldehyde. And when that happens, right, it damages the liver at the cellular level, right? So the liver can take only so much of damage, right? After which, of course, the liver gets cirrhotic and gets hardened. But the same kind of traits have been seen in the liver when there is excess cortisol or excess stress continuously over a prolonged period of time, So then at that point, body gets into a mode of inflammation, right? And when inflammation happens, all the other functions of the liver get compromised, like detoxification, sending, So there are two ways of elimination, right? If you look at it, one is through intestines and one is through, kidneys, right? So all those functions get hampered, right? And continuous inflammation for a prolonged period of time can actually turn into cancer. Right. And, you would have heard a lot of doctors talking about how cancer gets built. It's like at the cellular level, some cells just don't follow other cells and they start destructing their own cells at the cellular level. And that's how cancer gets expanded or gets spread in the body. It comes from the same logic, that continuous inflammation for a very prolonged period of time is going to cause cancer. And unfortunately, these are small reasons that double up to create a situation like that.
Right. So how does Ayurveda help in that? Like how does Ayurveda look at it first?
Yeah.
And how does it help?
I think the beauty of Ayurveda is that it looks at everything holistically. It does not look at organs in silos. In Ayurveda, releasing emotion is a very important part of the process, right? In fact, Panchakarma, which is the 5-step process of detoxification of the body, also heavily relies on mental release of emotions, right? There's a process so it's called Shirodhara, where you put oil on the Ajanya Chakra, right, on the center of the forehead, right? That basically stimulates all the happy hormones, right, and releases the stress through your chakra, right? So, I mean, from that to things like, just so Basti is another, form of releasing, toxins from the body. And that also primarily comes from the fact that there are unresolved emotions in your intestine, in your body, right, that gets released through those processes, right? So Ayurveda definitely has a lot of, focus on that. It's a combination of keeping your body in place with balancing Vata, Pitta, Kapha through different methods and processes. Then, adding a few herbs that act at the cellular level for detoxification and for betterment of wherever things are going wrong. For example, Shatavari, Lodhra, and, Ashoka, right? These herbs really help strengthen the overall uterus, right? They balance the estrogen in the uterus, right? So, a lot of these herbs actually act on these particular parts of the body and help heal them, right? So that happens along with, relaxing the nerves. There's just so much conversation around Brahmi, Gotukola, right? And how it induces melatonin, right? And calms the nerves, right? So it looks at overall, outlook of the body and then balances whatever.
So, but do these processes differ according to what dosha we have? Like,
Absolutely.
Would it differ the kind of herb that I'd be taking if I'm a pitta and someone else's other dosha?
Absolutely. If you're a pitta, then Ayurveda will never suggest giving you something which is warm or extremely warm in nature. Like, there are some foods which are hot in nature. So let's say cinnamon, dalchini, right? That's very warm in nature, right? Like somebody who has heavy kapha, right? We will never suggest them to have Gond Katira, especially during the latter half of the day when the sun rays are towards downside, right? So depending on what nature and what imbalances you have, right? So let's say a woman who's facing issues with infertility usually have a vata imbalance in her uterus, right? So you do something called yoni, where she's sitting on warm water with herbs, and everything gets cleansed and vata gets balanced, right? So looking at what kind of imbalances you have, Ayurveda has different treatments accordingly.
How much of significance is there, like on food? I'm sure. I mean, we do talk about that how important is our dietary requirement in terms of being fit and like holistic well-being. But how does Ayurveda look at it? Because I know that, calories, it's a very Western idea, right? But in Ayurveda, we talk about the prana, the life force in food. So a diet can have good amount of calories maybe, but it can be actually dead in terms of prana, right? So would you like to expand on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a very, very sharp question. So as per Ayurveda, right, the rasa in the food, right, or the vitality in the food, which is finally going to get into the body, right, and make you vitally higher, right, comes from the fact that how much of it is fresh, right, and that also comes from the logic that how much of sun rays or sunlight is left in that food, right? So food essentially grows because of sunlight, right? And the moment it gets cut from its root and reaches your plate, right, the distance between the time at which it was cut and the time that it comes to you, right, the longer that distance, the less vitality it will have, right? So that's first logic. Second is that these days, we are living in the world of Zomatos and Swiggies, and, everything, all the curries get frozen. Right, as per Ayurveda, those are the worst foods that you can have. So as per Ayurveda, you should cook the food right now and eat it fresh, right? You should eat the crop or the vegetable or the fruit that is grown nearest to your house, right? So everything needs to be cut immediately and, should be received by you, right? So anything that is frozen is not good. Anything that has a lot of preservatives in our packaged foods with big shelf lives are definitely not good for your body, right? Anything hot, anything seasonal, anything that was grown closest to your house is what will bring the most amount of life to you, right? Because the life is coming directly from the sources of the universe, right? So that's the logic. And by the logic of Ayurveda, non-vegetarian food is definitely not very encouraged.
I think it's also said now that what you eat is what you become.
Yes,
Especially
yes.
that's where what has
We
been
also
found.
have that concept of tamasic foods, right? And non-vegetarian food is definitely very tamasic in nature. It brings in
Would you
anger.
like to highlight and expand on what's tamasic and sattvic for people?
So I'll just give maybe an overview of it. So tamasic foods are foods that bring tama in you. So tama is basically material emotions, aggression, anger, aggressiveness, and it pushes you away from your oneness, right? Which is your peaceful connect and grounding to the universe, right? So that's typically the logic. And of course, sattvic foods are foods that keep you neutral, do not instigate any kind of emotions in your brain that might affect the Vata Pitta Kapha balance, right? And anything that will keep you closer to the elements of universe and not disturb you mentally and keep you grounded and connected to the earth. I think, and I have seen it personally, how I behave when I leave, garlic and onion, and how I behave when I'm eating one, right? But the unfortunate part is that in modern life, we are so disconnected with the actual universe, the natural light, right? We are constantly in, blue light and artificial light, and there's just so much, around not being in sync with the universe that at non-subtle parts, we are not able to understand what's happening in the body internally, right? And in fact, every disease gives you a lot of alarms before it becomes a disease, but at the cellular level, we are just so absent and disconnected that we don't realize it often.
Yeah. This is also one of the reasons why we've been able to manifest so many ailments in our lives, because like you said, that we do not care about whether we are eating fresh, right? I think given the lifestyle, we are ordering out every day, we're going for lunches and dinners, which really, really shakes up, I think our whole metabolism for that matter.
Yeah, in fact, there was this study that I was reading that people who take stress while eating or are in heated conversations during, eating food, what typically happens, the brain gets the signal that I have to manage the stress first, right? So it does not know how much HCl to release to digest that food, right? So the whole the system inside gets confused because they are managing stress and not being able to digest the food properly because they don't know how much HCl to release to, digest that food. The bile does not know what to absorb, what not to absorb, right? So the system gets confused. So it's best that you keep everything away, sit in peace, prefer sitting on the ground, feel connected.
You spoke about tamasic and sattvic foods, right? And I definitely align with what you said. But for example, again, given the lifestyle that we have, so many of us are really lacking in basic nutrients, whether that's vitamin D, whether that's vitamin B12, our calciums have gone down, right? And then comes this whole theory that no, you should be eating a little bit of non-veg because your dietary requirement is not getting fulfilled over here. What are the Ayurvedic replacements of that can take care of my dietary needs, my nutrients, without me having to depend on any such food? Because honestly, I don't want to.
Yeah. So I think, different foods have different replacements. I'll give an example. So we all thought that calcium is coming from milk. And milk over the years has been so processed and so modified that now that the milk that you get from the market is, forget about calcium, it's going to, disrupt your intestines, it's not good for your body. But there is very less, conversation around Gond Katira, which is just an extract from a tree. It's a gum crystal, zero processing. You literally take it out of the tree, and it has amazing, benefits. It has, calcium. It's extremely calcium rich. People who have knee issues or bone density issues should definitely have it, especially in the summers. It has so much fiber. It keeps your gut bacteria in place. Then of course, because of the fiber, there's no constipation. And it's in Ayurveda, in modern language, I would say it was literally the glutathione of today's world, because it helps cleanse your skin from within, and, completely removes a lot of oxidation that's happening at the cellular level. So, different herbs can really help you differently. It's just that we know very less about them now.
Tell me how, because I think food is also a very large part of our whole weight gain and weight loss process, right? And I really feel that, weight issues is actually not the question of my diet or my, my exercise routine or, how am I sleeping. I think the core is something else, right? How does Ayurveda look at weight gain?
I think the first thing is that your Vata Pitta Kapha has to be in place, right? It needs to be balanced. In Ayurveda, we say that if your food is warm, if you're able to flush out toxins on a daily basis, which is that you sweat, which is that you urine properly, the urination happens properly through kidneys, right? And if you don't have any kind of constipation, and if you feel empty after you've passed stools, it's a great starter, right? For women's health, it always talks about having your period cycle resonating with, the lunar cycle, the rays of the moon. So it says that when you're menstruating, right, it should align with the new moon. And when you're ovulating, right, that should align with full moon, right? And so these 4-5 things. So mainly it focuses on, the body's ability to take out toxins.
Detox,
right?
basically.
Yes. If you're able to take out the toxins normally, right? And if your, certain set of functions are in place, then you have a good body, right? And on the side of, fat and weight gain, Ayurveda talks about 2-3 things very clearly. One is eat as per the rays of the sun, right? So your portion sizes have to be as per the sun. What the science is saying is actually what Ayurveda has been saying for 5,000 years, right? So you eat breakfast like a king comes from the fact that the Surya Kiran, right, the rays of the sun are at the highest at that time. So Surya Kiran basically directly correlates to your Jatharagni, which in English we call digestive fire, right? Your capability to metabolize food, right? And that will be proportional to the rays of the sun. And that's the reason why we say that the breakfast has to be the heaviest, because that time, the sun rays are at the highest, right? And, you should have food in the night, which is your dinner, like a poor man. It's primarily because the rays of the sun are shut. Your system is about to get shut and start working on the detoxification throughout the night. Second, that it talks about very, very consistently is about seasonality, right? So if it's season of mangoes, don't start eating, something else, right? Don't start eating chiku, right? Just because it's available, because we're living in a world of genetically modified foods, right? So everything is available at every point of time. But that doesn't mean that you leave what is seasonal, right? So, and third is about eating fresh, eating hot food, right? It does not emphasize too much about eating cold foods, right? In fact, Ayurveda never says to pick up a bottle of water from the fridge and drink it, right? Because it's going to literally burn down the digestive fire, and your metabolic activity really gets hampered if you do that, right? And the last thing that it typically talks about is just having your Agni in place, right? You should be able to metabolize, detoxify on a natural basis without addition of any supplements or anything. As long as that is happening, your body is in place.
So how does one start the journey in terms of, for example, you spoke about Agni, right? How do I rekindle my Agni for better metabolism without having to rely on any diet or gymming? Is there any Ayurvedic process?
So the first thing is eating home and eating fresh, right? In today's language, I would say eating home and eating fresh is very critical. Second thing is that if you're hungry 100%, eat 80%, right? Eat a little lesser than what you can technically do. That will help your liver, fasten up the process. Third thing that Ayurveda talks about is just, eating a lot of seasonal food. Again, the same thing that we know anyway. And I think from a daily modern day life, I would say eating before 8 p.m., right? At least having 4 to 5 hours of gap from the last sleep to the time you sleep. Having a mindful sleep, no disturbances in the night, no waking up in the night. If that is happening, then there's some problem with some organ of your body. So mindful sleep. In fact, if you're sleeping well, right, the result of your weight loss will be much, much higher when compared to going to the gym, right? And it's now scientifically proven as well.
Right? Why is that? Why is sleep?
Because so a lot of detoxification of all the organs is going to happen while you're asleep. That is first. Second, a lot of repair at the cellular level is happening at that time, right? In fact, a lot of diseases that might happen to you will not happen if you're sleeping properly. Because the body is such a beautiful device that it will auto cleanse your body from whatever parasite or external, pathogen has come into your body, right? So, body is a beautiful place to be in. It's just that we don't know what to do, right? So I think these 3-4 things are like really.
Yeah. Okay. When it comes to weight loss, we have been hearing so much about Mounjaro, right? Yeah. How it mimics our GLP-1 hormones, which also helps us in weight loss. I wanted to understand from you, does it actually work? And are there any Ayurvedic replacements for that, which deliver the same result?
So Mounjaro, while it's been out for a while now, it's been almost 4 or 5 years, we don't have a lot of data on the side effects as yet, right? And typically in the medical industry, it takes about 10 years to be able to conclusively say what are the benefits and what are the side effects. So my suggestion would always be that if you don't have a very grave problem, right? And if you genuinely have, diabetes that is not reversible for some reason, then only go for these kind of, medicines. But from an Ayurvedic perspective, I think weight loss is directly proportional to your digestive fire. So work on your digestive fire, which is eating warm foods, sipping on warm water through the day, right? A lot of people massage their bellies with castor oil, right? So that there's a little bit of fire that gets ignited. There is something called cold womb that we talk about in Ayurveda. And that again is a lot about blood not reaching the ovaries, right? So that stimulation needs to be there, right? As long as you're able to do that with 3-4 fundamentals that I just mentioned, I think it's great. And from the herb perspective, yes, ashwagandha does very well. I think it just gives you enough energy to do chores of the day and also manage some exercise if at all you're doing that. And it at metabolic level, even Shilajit really works well. But with Shilajit, the important part is to know when to have it. You can't have it in summers because it will affect the liver in some way, right? Because it's very hot in nature, right? So there are herbs that can help. But just sticking to the fundamentals of, having ajwain water, jeera water, having hot water, right? Having foods that are slightly warm in nature that can reignite the fire. I think that's the key. And not drinking, cold water, having ice creams and cold salads. That's not what Ayurveda promotes. And ghee has a lot of, relevance in Ayurveda. Having warm khichdi with a little bit of ghee in the night. That really does wonders to the body. It also has amino acids, so the protein is also kind of taken care of, right? So it looks at things from a very different lens, I would say.
is intermittent fasting, which has been a part of Ayurveda,
Yeah.
I think, for the longest time. Is it recommended for all type of doshas, or does it also have to do that, according to dosha, you should be doing or not doing?
So there are two views to it. One, I'm going to talk about what is the fundamental reason why intermittent fasting works, and that completely comes from the fact that you're letting at the cellular level, you're letting the cells rest and let them do their job, which is recovery and detoxification at the cellular level, removing the toxins. Right. The more time you're going to give by not putting food in your mouth, the more it's like enablement of the cells to do their job, right? So that's one, right? Why intermittent fasting works, because you're able to release the toxins enough, and that doesn't get settled in the body, and hence you lose weight, right? Now in Ayurveda, of course, there's a terminology now that there's something called intermittent fasting, but Ayurveda has been preaching this for centuries, right? That you stop eating, or you eat very less when the sun goes down, and you eat only after sunrise, which is almost 12 hours of gap any which ways, right? So you're doing a 14 or 16 hardly takes a lot of it doesn't matter so much, right? But with women, I think one should work as per the phase of your menstrual cycle that you're in,
Sure.
right? So usually women's reproductive cycles are divided into 4 phases, right? You are in follicular phase, then you're in your ovulation phase, then there's luteal phase, and then there is menstruation phase, right? So different phases in those 4 weeks require different amount of energy, right? And maybe intermittent fasting might not work in few weeks, right? Because that time your energy demand is higher than rest of the weeks, right? And that's why it's good to keep a gap of 12 hours, but eating suddenly so much in the night and not eating anything in the morning, right? It's going to disrupt your circadian cycle, right? It's going to literally disrupt your normal hormonal functions. So don't do that is what I will advise.
So how does anyone with this current lifestyle, when people are literally have their offices poles apart, right, and reaching home maybe by 8:30, in such a scenario, what would you recommend for those people that they are able to eat and still able to digest, because the time period to
Yeah.
wind up is very short?
Yeah. I think I'll address it in 2 ways. One is that if you have the flexibility to take something to your office, carry something for an evening meal, do that if that's possible. But if you're saying that it's impossible and I cannot do that, I will suggest eat something warm in the night and which is easy to digest, right? So you could do warm soups. You could do a little bit of khichdi with more dal and less rice, maybe a handful of it with a lot of ghee. And then do not sleep immediately, because all of that is going to go and settle into your liver, right? And literally settle as fat, right? So it is very, very important that you move a bit after your last meal and do not sleep immediately, right? As long as you're doing that, I'm not saying that it's the perfect way to do it, but it is still better than what you're thinking in your head right now.
What are the top 3 food trends or diet trends that has been really been hyped up but are actually ruining our gut health or our metabolism?
I'm going to talk about whey protein and then people will be against me. It's very, very controversial to talk about it.
Sure.
But whey proteins and how they are getting processed today, it's actually deteriorating the gut health, right? That's one that I don't feel very right about. Second trend is again these turmeric shots and excessively eating giloy. I mean, all of this is going to get into your system and damage the liver because you're doing it in excess, right? Imagine I have a pitta pravritti and I'm taking curcumin shots every day. I'm literally going to damage my liver. And unfortunately, it's not even going to get absorbed because it needs fat soluble substance. So curcumin is a fat soluble substance. For absorption, it needs, fat. It's the same reason why your nani and dadi said, have haldi ka doodh, because that bought the fat,
Yeah.
right? So that second fat that I'm completely against.
Sure.
And I think third is just, I'm just in general very concerned about how the whole health ecosystem is being spoken about. That don't eat rice, don't eat that. I think you can't look at things in silos. It has to be in sync with how the ecosystem is. And yeah, just like avoiding stuff like avocados and all, you never know what source are they coming from, just because the Western world opted in very quickly doesn't mean that you also have to. And there are equally good alternatives to all these Western world things in the country already. So find that out. Jackfruit is like a great alternative to maybe an avocado. It has so many nutrients, but it's not got its limelight, let's just say.
Yeah. What would be the other top 3 Ayurvedic superfoods according to you?
I think, of course, different people have different opinions on it, but I think giloy is a great herb. Again, don't use it excessively, but giloy is a great herb for overall immunity. I'm a big fan of tulsi. I think tulsi is very sheetla in nature. Like it's very delicate on your body and also builds a lot of immunity. And third superfood, I will say moringa. Hands down moringa. I think the nutritional value in moringa is next level. I don't know why people were not talking about it. We've been just gaga about matcha, and there was moringa sitting in India that nobody spoke about.
Yeah.
But yeah, these 3 superfoods.
Sure. Would you like to highlight some of the benefits of moringa?
I mean, the nutritional value of moringa, be it the kind of vitamins and minerals it has, I think it's a complete meal in so many ways. So yeah, hands down moringa.
What is Ayurveda's take on gut health, gut permeability, like we say, right? How does Ayurveda look at it?
So I think I should definitely talk about this one fact. Almost 200, 300 years ago, we had almost 10,000 gut microbiomes in the body, right? And with chemicals and metals and, whatever industrialization happened, and we got to the kind of foods that we eat today, it's now just 1,600, right? So the flora and fauna inside the gut suddenly vanished with all these chemicals, pesticides and metals and so many things that we've eaten in the name of health for such a long time now, right? So, but as per Ayurveda, your gut will be in perfect sync if you're eating seasonal, if you're eating a little bit of food which is raw in nature. So it says that have the raw foods or slightly less heated foods in the day. Again, same logic. Digestive fire is high, you'll be able to digest it properly. And the moment you go down the day, right, eat cooked food which is easy to digest. And hence ghee and hence rice and hence a little bit of dal because that's easy to digest. Right. Second thing that it really, really talks about is having all kinds of, fruits and vegetables with different colors. Right. So having all the rasas in your plate. Right. If you will look at a traditional plate that comes from an Indian ecosystem, right, it will have something which is sour. It will have something which is pungent. It will have something which is sweet. Right. So it talks a lot. It gives a lot of value to what gets tasted on your palate, on your tongue. Right. So it says that whatever gets touched on your tongue will get eventually absorbed and assimilated in the body. Right. It gives a lot of significance to rasas, and that brings in a lot of, in flora and fauna inside the body and, increasing the gut bacteria.
Sure. Yeah. Is rasas and rasayans the same?
Rasa is the energy value in a food, and this is more to do with different types of tastes in the food, right? So as long you're exposed to all types of taste to your palate, right, your gut microbiome will become healthier every time.
Yeah. Now I want to really come to, I think, one of the very potent topics, and I think it's also going to help out a lot of women. I really want to talk about PCOS. A lot of women are suffering from it, and I don't think we have really hit like a solid answer to that, right? Ayurveda, according to my understanding, looks at PCOS as not a very hormonal imbalance. I mean, it definitely manifests in that way, but it looks at it as a fight between the masculine and the feminine energies, right? Would you like to expand on that?
I mean, unfortunately, we are in time and age where we are trying to take the same seat as men. And usually, the hormonal imbalance that happens, of the progesterone and estrogen, that typically happens from the fact that at the emotional level, you would notice that with women with PCOS. And I was one, I had PCOS almost 8-10 years ago. They're slightly more aggressive. They become more angry. They're slightly more territorial in nature. They're over competitive, right? They have their cortisols constantly high because they've been just in an environment that was not naturally meant for them, right? And I think unfortunately what we've tried doing is we've, to get the same kind of success in the material world, we just tried copying what a guy or a man does, right? On the contrary, Ayurveda talks a lot about feminine power, which is immense and very deep. And if you channelize yourself through that, you'll be able to do things in much more stronger and deeper ways, right? I think a little miss that what we've had as modern women is that we thought that replicating what a man does will probably get us to the same material success. But I think it's just connecting to our own feminine energy and still being able to do what you want to do in the material world. I think that is what is missing right now. And PCOS, of course, is unfortunately a lot about that as well.
Women getting masculinized.
Yes. In fact, women with PCOS have elevated levels of testosterone, right? And elevated level of testosterone just talks about these behaviors, right? It formally comes out as being more authoritative or being more territorial in nature. And, so all of that is coming from an increased amount of testosterone. So yeah, I mean, of course.
So we are saying that we can still keep our ambitions, be the go-getters and disrupt the world, but
just
let's
tap into the
it.
right energy. I think that is what is missing right now.
You spoke of cold womb sometime back, right? Traditional healers definitely say that in PCOS, it makes your womb cool and dry, right? Is that true, first of all? And
yes,
how
absolutely.
does that one awaken the warmth of womb again?
So of course, in Ayurveda, there are processes that can be done. But fundamentally, what happens is that first is that the uterus becomes cold and heavy and bulky. And it's the bulky nature of the uterus that, gets so many cysts in the uterus, right? I mean, PCOS is also about having cysts in the uterus, right? So that cold nature of the womb arises from a lot of blood not being circulated in the ovaries, right? And there is, of course, Vata imbalance, right? Because of which there is hormonal imbalance. The androgens level go significantly higher than what is required. There is an imbalance in estrogen and progesterone. So all of that is happening because, of course, these hormonal imbalances, and of course, a large part of it also comes from our dietary habits, right? A lot of women who have PCOS, at least I've observed, they're not in sync with, the sun rays. They're probably eating up late in the night at 2-3 a.m., right? And hormones suddenly get confused because unfortunately they don't understand this lifestyle. They only understand that you sleep after 10 p.m. and do not eat in the night, right? Constant cortisol, that of course brings in a lot of hormonal imbalance, right? Body is not ready for all these things. So I think that is also a factor.
Okay. So while treating PCOS, I think a lot of women, the kind of medicines they have, it's almost like birth control pills, right? And wanted to understand the Ayurvedic take on it, that these birth control pills,
Yeah.
are they actually silencing the natural rhythms of the body?
So birth control pills are nothing but artificial, artificial way of inducing estrogen and progesterone in the body, right? It's going to mimic the estrogen and progesterone and then get into your body and make sure that you are menstruating every 28, 30 days, right? Now, this is a very big blunder because you are suppressing the natural cycle of the body, suppressing the natural hormones, and just mimicking something which can completely disrupt the natural cycle, even in future, right? It's in fact the same reason why the moment you stop these pills, right, your body is actually worse. I'll give you a small instance. My sister, while she was significantly young, so both of us had PCOS, right? And she was put on these pills. And I think she was, 15, 16 years of age. And she lost so much of hair from literally the top of her crown. And I have seen very closely how bad it was once she was on the pills. Right? So the idea, Ayurveda looks at it from a very different lens, right? It looks at the root cause of why it is happening, right? And then you do things to correct that cycle, not to just suppress and mimic something over it. Right. And in Ayurveda, of course, we look at it from 2-3 lenses. One, of course, is that, the Vata imbalance has to be in place. Right. That's very critical when it comes to, and then it's the same reason why you have things like yoni, where you're sitting on a pot which has this warm water with couple of herbs like Ashoka, Shatavari, right? What it does is it balances the Vata imbalance in the uterus. It also warms, the uterus and increases the blood circulation at the ovarian level, right? This is why initially your uterus was cold, right? That's one thing that is done. The other thing that is, of course, which we also do in Namya, which is, giving the herbs that can naturally become as a catalyst to healing of your uterus. So Ashoka has been known, to strengthen the uterus, to strengthen the lining of the uterus, right? It also balances the estrogen and progesterone in the body. Same goes for Lodhra also, right? And Shatavari is, of course, a very known and recognized herb, right? It's great for female health, right? So that's one thing that you can do. Third thing that it talks about is moon bathing, right? So in Ayurveda, we've always known that the 28-day period cycle of a woman actually resonates with the lunar cycle, which is again 28, 29 days, right? And, if you look at ancient scriptures, it talks in length about how there was, women who had issues with conception. They would sit in the natural light of moon and, get healed. So moon by its own sense is Sheetal in nature, right? It's cold in nature, right? So for women who are infertile or not able to conceive, right, there's a lot of non-toxic elimination that is happening because of imbalanced pitta, right? So it balances that pitta, it calms down that on a nervous system, it calms it down, right? It stimulates more melatonin in the body, right? So you're at a nervous system, you are more, calm down and you have better sleep, right? That also helps in reproduction, right? It also enables, good health of Ojas, right? Ojas is basically reproductive substance which is required in while you're reproducing, right? And there's a concept, once you read ancient scriptures, there's a concept of white moon cycle and red moon cycle, right? So white moon cycle is usually for younger women who are very fertile. They will, on new moon, they will basically be menstruating, and on full moon, they will be ovulating. It's the reverse in case of red moon cycle. It resonates with women who are slightly more mature, are healers probably, and have gone through a few cycles where they can, with their own feminine power, reverse the nature cycle of ovulation and menstruation.
With their own power? That is crazy for me.
Yes.
How does that happen?
It's a concept, where women after a certain age, can explore untapped energies, where they have moved out of their regular job or regular systems of reproducing and being fertile and being, doing what they're naturally supposed to do, and move away from it, and then have that feminine power where they'll be able to heal people, move beyond the cyclical nature of childbirths and, move away from it. So there's a concept that it
kind
speaks
of
about.
direct and channelize that power
Yes,
somewhere else.
yeah.
Okay.
I think from that lens, we still advise a lot of our patients to, put a glass of water or put a bottle of water, which is slightly transparent, put it in the moonlight in the night, right? And drink that water in the morning, right? So that water goes in the body and heals the, uterus. In fact, there's a lot of, moon is also in astrology, moon is a denotion of emotions, right? That's the reason why a lot of people get emotionally sensitive on full moons, right? And PCOS and PCOD, probably infertility is happening because of two reasons. One, you're emotionally becoming insensitive, because women by their own nature are slightly more sensitive emotionally, right? And when you're in a man's world, you push or suppress your emotions unnaturally, right? So you also drink that moon water to get your emotional connectedness, again, right? And it heals at levels that we don't understand in the material world.
No, I've literally heard of all of these things that you've said, right?
Yeah.
I think from our nannies and our dadis, we all have heard it.
Yeah.
It's just that, like I said at the start also, that they never give us the logic behind it. But now listening from you, it just made total sense.
Yeah.
We have been gaga over the importance of sunlight, right? But moonlight is equally important, especially for women.
Yeah.
And I think this is why a lot of our women, our ancestors also used to follow this moon bathing rituals.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, moon bathing ritual is a lot associated. So there's a dhatu called Shukra dhatu, right? Which basically is a reproductive tissue in Ayurvedic language, right? So that has to be in place if you're really planning to conceive, right? And for your Shukra dhatu to be to be in place and be fertile, that also has a lot to do with moon energy. Right. In fact, I know so many people who've healed themselves with moon energy.
Now I find like Ayurveda, astrology, everything's so interconnected.
Interconnected, absolutely.
Our ancestors, they were geniuses. We compartmentalize everything and look at everything in isolation.
Yeah.
But if you look at from their lens, everything seems to be very holistic and very well connected.
I mean, in our household, we still practice what to do on Amavasya, what to do on a full moon, right? There are few practices that we do just because you want to be in sync with the universe's energy, right? And it's just the disconnectedness that we have with the universe, with natural light, doing things which are against the nature. I think that has put us in a place like this. Otherwise, I think things were beautiful as they were.
So we can say that moonlight really feeds the uterus,
absolutely,
balancing the emotions and everything.
Absolutely.
From the lens of Ayurveda, is there any best time window to conceive? Like the easiest way?
I mean, so I'm not sure if that's true, but usually, the season changes are supposed to be windows where you should not conceive. And cyclically, between August to November is the time when your metabolism, your body strength is at its highest, right? So before you enter winters, basically, that is the best time from a season perspective. From a timing perspective, it is usually said, that you should attempt to conceive during, 9 to 11 in the night or then early morning. That is the time when your fertility is at the highest. But in general, the answer to this question would be when you don't have any emotional baggages, when you're emotionally clean, right? Because you are basically going to attempt a new life, right? That should not come with your baggage, right? So you emotionally should be clean. You should be at your fittest self, right, before you do so. And same goes for the man. I think fitness and reproductive health is very critical before you conceive.
I would also want you to touch upon, I think most of the people suffer from it, again, owing to our lifestyle. That's constipation, right? If you can help us, like, help to break down what exactly happens, and then how, again, through Ayurvedic foods, what would be the best remedies that one can follow to cope up with it.
So I'll talk about my personal experience. I was also experiencing this a little bit last year. And with my own personal experience, I found out stress was the biggest reason. I think stress really can lead to constipation. Not eating enough fiber and raw food, right? So right now, like in the afternoon, I always have like a big bowl of salad before I touch any food, right? So more fiber you will have, right? Especially during the time when the sun rays are like at its peak, right? That's when you can digest raw food very well, right? That's a very important factor. And personally, I have seen leaving milk and dairy products has really helped me remove constipation from my life. It's something which I did not believe for the longest, because Ayurveda talks a lot about buttermilk, milk, right, and its significance. But unfortunately, we are not in the same times when, these scriptures were written. We are in a very different time when, everything is modified and it's not healthy for the body. In fact, there are so many studies that I have read now which talks about how intestines are getting affected by drinking more milk, right? But yes, Ayurveda does talk about significance of ghee, keeping lubrication in place, right? So it talks a lot about lubrication, right? That in every food that you have, right, there should be equal amount of fiber, and it should have something that enables lubrication. And I think all hands down, I mean, ghee has been spoken a lot about in Ayurveda. So that's one. Other reason why constipation happens also go down to gut bacteria, right? Not having enough gut bacteria, right? And the trick is the same: having warm foods, having seasonal foods, having something hot, not drinking too much of cold water, right? These small things really affect whether you are constipated or not. And I think a good idea would also be to have these natural products that are available. I spoke about Gonkatira, right? So somebody who has constipation can start having Gonkatira in the day, and I can guarantee you in 10 days they'll see almost 80% of their constipation gone. We talk also a lot about Triphala powder, right, which is a mix of herbs, right? That again has great significance. It helps with vitamin C. It's great for constipation, and it literally flushes out toxins from your body, right? And it's absolutely natural, no side effects, no effect on your liver at all, right? So Ayurveda talks about these 2-3 things a lot.
Okay. Off the camera, you were telling me about how different doshas can result in particular, traits and personalities. And I was literally mind blown by that. So would you like to also highlight on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we were discussing the exercise part, right? So Vata people already have air as a dominant element,
Sure.
right? So the moment you put them in aerobic exercises, it might not be the best idea for them, right? Because Vata will get imbalanced, right? So a lot of dancing or running or aerobic exercises, right, is not great for Vata people.
Okay.
In fact, they should lift weights, right? They should do exercises that bring more stability in them, right? In fact, it's suggested in yoga that Vata people should meditate more and get their sthirta, which is, just being balanced in all aspects of life and not being fidgety and, moving too much, right? That is what is suggested for Vata people, right? Vata people, by their actual virtue, are not very fat or obese or heavy people. They slightly have a slightly narrow build, right? They're not very wide in terms of the build. Pitta people are sturdy, strong, again, not very fat, right? And from the basic nature. Of course, I'm not going to get into diets and how people get fat, but from their natural self of structure, right? They are slightly more angry in nature, right? They have short temper, anger issues, of course, and of course, liver issues because of anger issues. And Pitta people sweat very quickly, right? If they eat something which is very hot in nature, let's say a cinnamon or red meat, you will see them sweating immediately, right? They are the ones who feel hot all the time. They're the ones who are putting ACs in the month of November and December, right? And for them, they need to do more of exercises that cool them down, right? So restorative yoga is again great for them, right? Shitali pranayam, right, where you have cooling effect, right? That is great for them. Anulom Vilom is again, it's basically balancing the energies, right? That is great for them. And cold foods, Gond Katira, lemon water, watermelon, anything that is cold in nature is great for them. Kapha people are mostly more sedentary in nature. So the first advice given to them is that move, because by nature they are very sedentary in their way of working, right? They are also slightly heavy in terms of their structure, right? They have like very thick black, long hair if it's a girl, or they have curly hair if it's a guy. Right? Kapha people mostly have complaints around cough and congestion and stuff which is more related to heaviness in the lungs. Right? So they need to drink, warm waters constantly. They need to have something warm. They are the ones who should be probably going for aerobic exercises because that kind of helps them lose weight better. Right, so different structures, different people, different traits, and Kapha people are very grounded in nature, right? They are not going to take any decision like that. They're going to think twice before they do something, right? So they're very strategic, analytical in nature.
But it's so good that you also spoke of their exercise, preferential exercise routine, because if you go to a gym, every gym instructor has this list of exercises that you need to do because this is how you're going to lose weight. No one over there talks about that how according to your body nature you should be adopting to these exercises.
And I think it's more significant for women, because when you're going through your menstruation or your luteal phase, that is the time you need to do more of restorative yoga. You're not supposed to be very aggressive. You're supposed to do things that calm your nerves down. You're supposed to maybe walk a little bit on your menstruation days, maybe do a lot of restorative yoga, a lot of yoga in general, which is not very aggressive in nature, right, in your luteal phase. A follicular phase or an ovulation phase is where you have much more energy, right? So during the follicular phase, we suggest women, in fact, Ayurveda suggests women to do more of, cardio, and that kind of exercises, right? The moment you hit your ovulation week, that is the time, you're generally very emotionally high, you're more sociable, you have a lot of energy, right? So you can do a mix of lifting weights because you're high on energy that time. So different phases of your, period cycle can also enable different kind of exercises.
And is it possible that people can have also combination of doshas, or is it like one dosha that would be dominant?
You can have combination of doshas, but there's going to be always one dosha which is going to be dominant in your body. Right? So that is where we kind of characterize the person.
Sure. Do you want to quickly tell people that if they have one particular dosha as dominant, what can be the possible ailments that they can encounter?
So Vata people, can have issues related to gut, right? Constipation is a very big part of it. Vata imbalance in women can lead to infertility, right? A cold womb, which we were talking about. Pitta people have mostly issues related to liver because of Pitta imbalance, right? Because of a lot of hot nature that they have. Right, so mostly related to indigestion, acid reflux, liver issues is something that you will find more commonly in people with Pitta. And Kapha people have more issues related to their weight and related to their, breathing, right? So asthma could be one. A lot of cough accumulation happens in them, right? So anything related to ENT, those kind of issues they have.
Interesting. And I think you have given the remedies for almost all of them in the
Yeah.
episode. Thank you so much, Ridhima,
Thank
for
you.
our very first wellness episode, I'd say. And it has been an absolute pleasure. There were a lot of things that literally I have heard all throughout my life. I do follow some, but again, I think my rational mind always wanted that logic. I'm a big believer of Ayurveda and very blessed to have come from a family that really depends and relies on that, what Nani said and what Dadi
Okay.
said. But I think putting in science and putting in that logic, I think
Yeah.
that's also going to help a lot of people understand that why it is so important.
Yeah.
A lot of new things that I learned from you, especially about moon bathing. That's definitely going to be in my ritual. But absolute pleasure hosting you and speaking to you
Thank
on
you.
this.
Pleasure was mine.
Thank you so much for
Thank
opening more doors to Ayurveda. And I think you're doing a great job. Just
Thank you.
keep doing that. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
And all of you, thank you so much for sticking till the end. We really hope that today's episode was an eye-opener for you. I'm sure that a lot of concepts that you've already heard, but like I said, that sometimes we again need that nudge and we need that deeper understanding. We hope that we've been able to do that for you and inspire you to start your journey in Ayurveda. And if this really, really deeply resonated with you, or if you think that this can help someone in your circle, please don't forget to share this episode with them. Don't forget to click on our subscribe button, hit the notification bell for more such episodes, and I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much.